Hello, everyone. Welcome to At America TV. My name is James, one of the e-guides here at At America, and we welcome our audience members joining us online. We hope that you're doing well and staying safe. At America is the U.S. Embassy's American Center, and our mission is to provide a space for young Indonesians to learn more about the United States. We have temporarily moved to a solely digital platform so that you guys could enjoy us from the comforts of your own home. For those of you who are joining us through our social medias, you can leave your questions in the question box section area. In this episode, we'll be having Not All Houses Are Homes. But before we begin, I have a question for everyone, a little icebreaker game. The question is true or false? The current lockdown has nothing to do with the increasing numbers of domestic violence cases. Stay tuned until the end of this program because we'll be giving a live shout out to whoever can answer correctly on our social media accounts. But before we begin the event, I'd like to invite Ibu Heather Variava, the Chargé d'Affaires for U.S. Embassy Jakarta. Ibu Heather?
Thank you. Hello, and a very warm welcome to everyone who's joining us from your homes, from your place of work, wherever you may be. Selamat datang ke At America. I'd like to extend a special welcome today to our panelists to talk about this very important topic. We have with us from the state of Maine in the United States, Nicole Luttrell of the New Hope for Women, which is a domestic violence resource center in Maine. We also have Ibu Wulan Danukusumo from Binus University and co-founder of Lentera Sintas Indonesia. We also have with us today Allison Russell, who is a survivor of domestic abuse. And moderating our panel discussion today is Mayfree Shari of CNN Indonesia. Thank you, all of you, for your brave work in advocating for the safety and well-being of domestic abuse survivors and advocating for the end of domestic violence. Today's program, which is entitled Not All Houses Are Homes, addresses a very serious topic that we all face: violence perpetrated by individuals upon their spouse or their partner. Domestic violence can be physical, mental, sexual, or involve other actions such as the removal of financial support. While anyone can be a victim of a domestic abuse, the majority of domestic violence survivors are women. Today's program is particularly critical because evidence is showing that domestic violence has increased around the world during the COVID-19 pandemic. This is an issue that affects all countries, including the United States and Indonesia. According to the Indonesian National Commission for Women's 2020 annual report, over 430,000 Indonesian women were subjected to violence last year in 2019. Sadly, this represents a 6% increase of incidents from the previous year. And the year before that, incidents had increased 14%, according to the commission. So we're seeing an overall uptick in reports of domestic violence in Indonesia. Civil society activists here in Indonesia often underscore that these numbers are only the tip of the iceberg and that the real numbers could be as high as 10 times the commission's numbers. If domestic violence is so widespread, why don't we hear more about it? Around the world, domestic violence cases often go unreported to the police, and even fewer are prosecuted. In Indonesia, only about 1% of the more than 430,000 estimated cases were reported to the police. And only about 940 cases of violence against women were litigated through the court system in 2019, which is about 1/5 of 1% of the cases. So given the size of the population of Indonesia, this unfortunately is a very small number, and again represents really only the tip of the iceberg of this problem in Indonesia. This low number suggests that the legal framework and society's attitudes does not currently support or encourage victims to seek justice through the court system. The government of Indonesia and the House of Representatives, or DPR, as we call it here in Indonesia, have recognized the critical importance of this issue and have proposed a bill on the elimination of sexual violence. Unfortunately, we learned last week that the DPR has removed the bill from its list of priority legislation for 2020, noting that there's not enough time to complete work on the bill before the session ends in October. As activists and civil society organizations in Indonesia have made clear, this bill is urgently needed as it emphasizes the importance of prevention, the protection and rights of victims, the compensation for the victims, as well as actions aimed at restoring a victim's dignity. So we hope that the government of Indonesia and DPR will move to deliberate and pass this bill in the not too distant future. Lastly, we believe that an important component of the fight against violence against women are discussions like this one we have here today to shed light on these awful crimes and build up an ever-growing cadre of activists who say enough is enough when it comes to domestic violence. I hope that the panel discussion today will help people, encourage people to be more aware of this problem, encourage victims to speak up and find people to share their stories with and hopefully get help because only by reducing the stigma and making an atmosphere that women can feel free and comfortable to talk about the violence they face. Only then can we begin to address this real problem. So I'd like to thank everyone for joining us today to discuss the importance of domestic violence, why it happens, and what we can do to help survivors and prevent future abuse. So thank you for letting me join you, and I very much look forward to hearing from the experts on the panel. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ibu Heather, for the opening remarks. I really appreciate that. I'd also like to remind our audience to not forget to take a selfie and tag our @America's Instagram account. Now, without further ado, let me introduce everyone to today's moderator, Mayfree Sari from CNN Indonesia news anchor. How are you doing, Mayfree?
I'm good. Thank you, James. How are you?
I'm doing great. Thank you. Well, the floor is yours.
Thank you, James. And thank you also, Bu Heather and all of U.S. Embassy staff and also @America member. Thank you for the opportunity to let me participate in this event. We're going to talk about something that is very important, but is also very sensitive. So just remember that during the discussion, there's going to be lots of deep discussion, deep experiences that will be told by our by our panelists tonight, and those discussion might lead us and maybe triggered us to feel uncomfortable. So whenever you feel uncomfortable, just take a break and then feel free to just take a break first and then later on join us again to continue the discussion. And as I heard from @America team earlier, that there's gonna be a running text of hotline number in Indonesia and also in America. So you can just check under the screen. You can check it. There's gonna be like a running text sort of that you can always check whenever you need to get help. Okay. Well, talking about this event, not all houses are homes. I think all of the data has been exposed by Bu Heather earlier. She talked about how the number raises not only in Indonesia, but also in the world. And tonight, we're going to have 3 panelists. And before we start our discussion, I would like to greet our panelists for tonight first. We have Mbak Wulan Danu Kusumo. Hi, good evening, Mbak Wulan. Mbak Wulan is a counseling section head in Binus University, and she's also a clinical psychologist with years of experience working for national and also international humanitarian agencies. And she also established an NGO called Lentera Sintas Indonesia. This NGO provides psychological assistance for victims of sexual violence, and she will talk more about how is domestic violence is actually happening in Indonesia and how to cope with that. And aside from her, we also have Nicole in here. Hi, Nicole. How are you? She's
Good morning.
joining us. Yeah, she's joining us from Maine.
Yes, it's morning here, and I'm doing well and very happy
Oh,
to be
yeah.
here.
Good morning for you. Nicole is a domestic violence advocate for New Hope for Women in Maine. It's actually where she can, working with the victims, survivors, and also give some counseling, right? And she will talk more about it later on. And our last panelist for tonight is Allison Russell. Hi, Allison.
Hi, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Good. Thank you.
Well, yeah, and Allison will give us sort of an experience that she's been facing because she is a survivor of domestic violence. So without further ado, I'd like to let our first speaker for tonight to talk more about it. But before that, I would like to remind you all that we have a 20 minutes discussion. After that, we're going to open the question and answer session. So if anyone who's watching now and you would like to ask some questions, feel free to give the questions, and then later we'll try to ask it to our panelists for tonight. Okay, so we're going to ask Baulan first. So how are you, Baulan?
I'm good, Mayfree. How are you?
I'm good. So talking about the number of domestic violence, before pandemic, the number is also high. But after pandemics, where we all, some of us, most of us, are kind of told that we are safer when we're at home. But in fact, some of us don't get that. We just don't, we might be safe from the virus, but we are also at risk of having a domestic violence at home, where it should be a safer place than the other place. So talking about that, how is the actual condition in Indonesia and what is actually causing it happen, Baulan?
Okay, so I'm going to quote the recent research findings by National Commission on Eliminations of Violence Against Women, Komnas Perempuan, which was just launched last month, I think. And this online survey was identifying indeed increase in the numbers of domestic violence. They're saying that women who are with a background of income less than 5 million rupiah, less than $500 per month, and working in informal sectors between the age of 31 to 40, and married and with more than 3 kids, and staying in 10 provinces with highest exposure of COVID-19 has been reported having increasing experience of domestic violence. So the majority of respondents also said that the work, it's also influenced by the increasing workload as well. And about 80% of the female respondents says that physical and sexual violence is also increasing, especially when it indicates that there's also a significant economical pressure. And unfortunately, from those who are saying that they're experiencing domestic violence, less than 10% of the victims report their cases to the support or help support center. And also, despite the fact that many of those respondents happen to have a pretty good background educations, many of them did not have access or did not, have contacts of those help support system. So that is something that we also need to help them with as well, exposing them to the local hotline numbers that I'm sure At America will share with us all later. And you were saying that what is causing them, I think I've pretty much summarized, but I'm gonna elaborate a little bit further, that the fact that being quarantined 24/7 does not necessarily help with the situations. too often we don't. I think this pandemic fundamentally is a good exercise for us to reflect on the quality of our relationship with everyone that we usually take for granted, family for instances. We usually probably just go with the routine and the monotonous timing, and we just going to school, going to work, going home for dinner, etc. Never really we had to put up with each other for quite some times. So being in quarantine with our family members also give us an opportunity to reflect on the quality of our relationship. Unfortunately, for those who happen to live with people who abuse them, or living with a toxic family members or a toxic spouse, etc., might see this as even a more contrapting situations where there's not much of a possibility to even breathe a little bit, because the perpetrator, the person who abused them or who is creating the toxic situation, stays at home most of the time. So that, of course, we all so know that violence does not happen overnight. People don't become violent overnight. It's always an escalation. It's always a process. So what is happening right now is, of course, strengthened or heightened by many variables, but it's not just happening because of COVID. COVID, the pandemic, the quarantine, it just worsened the situations. But if you're asking me, did it started? No, I believe it's something that has started way before, but too often people do not want to address or do not know that it should be addressed, because sometimes the signs or the symptoms are just too subtle. We're familiar with domestic violence in Bahasa Indonesia as kekerasan dalam rumah tangga, which involves physical abuse. But to many of those who are experiencing violence at home, it's not necessarily needs to be just physical abuse. It could also be all those very subtle signs like name calling, degrading, belittling, body shaming, or even enforcing sexual activities, even between spouses and marriage partners as well. So sometimes we overlook those symptoms because we have justifications. We want to believe that it's something that they do because they love us, because they care about us, because they want to protect us and stuff, but not necessarily the case. Hence, more talks like this to help us to be more sensitive about the symptoms, about the signs, and knowing that those are the red flags, knowing that it's not okay if you are scared just to speak up your mind to your partner because you're afraid that he's going to be angry, or if he constantly saying, I have issue with controlling my emotions, so you better not getting me upset. If that kind of situations happen, something is wrong. It's already a red flag. It's already a starting point. But again, our culture in Indonesia does not necessarily comfortable addressing or intervening domestic issues such as that. So there has been cases, I'm sure many people who have been working with survivors can testify to this as well, that people are reluctant to intervene or choose just to, watch it from afar and be a bystander because they feel like it's a domestic issues, that they should not intervene because it's private matters, etc. But I still think that the culture does help in terms of generating the numbers of domestic violence and abusive relationships, because not many of us can say no or say stop because we think, well, he doesn't hit her or she doesn't hit him. Well, he just wants him to know where she works and how much she earns and who is she hang out with? That sounds like a protective husband. Yes, perhaps. But when it gets too overwhelming for the person who experienced it, sometimes the person who can actually know the signs is the one who experienced it. But again, too often people are not wanting to address it because they think they might be thinking they're overreacting, or maybe their support system says you're just overreacting, he doesn't mean that harm, and they just dismiss the worries, the concerns, etc., hence the escalating numbers of domestic violence.
So if the condition like that, how do we realize that some actions is part of the domestic abuse, domestic violence, and then how do we kind of get the courage to actually speak out and say no, say stop, not only to him or her, but also to the condition? Because as you mentioned before, there are lots of stigmatized that can be around, and there can be lots of, thoughts going on in their mind.
Okay, I think the only way how we can jump in, intervene, or help is by doing it. There's no other way around it. Either you help or you don't, because I'll talk about later on what to do when you're in abusive relationship, or what to do when you see someone in that abusive relationship or domestic violence context. But to say the least, to take the first step is always the hardest. Hence, whenever we do educational sessions or awareness raising, we always encourage people to say, if you see it, you own it. Don't turn your back, because it might be a false alarm, but it may not. I'm sure all of us remember the case of Kitty Genovese that actually started the terms bystander, how people could actually, do something faster to prevent the tragedy from happening. So I think all it takes is just one simple courage. Again, just do it, because the moment we don't say anything, I think we're condoning the situation, because when we say no, it means we are silently saying yes. Hence, we are helping the situations to grow. So if we're talking about changing the habit or the culture, there's no other way than starting from yourself, because if you want something to change, then you should be able to lead the way and show how. Educate yourself, of course, on what is the best way to intervene, what is the best way to express empathy to person who are experiencing domestic violence. Educate yourself on how can you access support system, helps, hotline centers, police if you need to. Educate yourself on how or to what extent is your support needed when somebody is actually wanted to leave the premises, leave the house, because the moment you leave the house, of course, all hells break loose, and there are things that you need to anticipate. So I don't have any other recipe for that, other than if you want to help, then you just do.
Because you don't know whether the help that you give, how meaningful it is to someone's life, right?
Because too often, you don't know how meaningful it is for someone just to know that somebody is there for you, a safe person that they can always turn to, and it means a lot to know that you are not alone.
Okay, thank you so much, Wulan, for the thoughts, and I'd like to move to Nicole, who's in Maine now. Hi, Nicole. So,
hello.
Nicole, we already heard from Wulan the condition, the situation in Indonesia about domestic violence, and how about it in the US? Does the number is also increased that high in the US during pandemic? And what is actually triggered the abusers in the US? Is it the same reason as Wulan mentioned before, or do you have any other thoughts about it?
Yes, thank you for including me in this discussion.
Mm-hmm.
It's very important to be talking about, and also very informative to hear about the situation in Indonesia. Mm-hmm. The thing about domestic violence or domestic abuse is that it is a global issue, as was suggested, at the beginning of this talk. Globally, 1 in 3 women will experience some form of intimate partner violence in their lifetimes, or some kind of violence against them from a family member. And in the US, the numbers that we have, I can provide more general numbers, are 1 in 4 women and 1 in 7 or 1 in 9 men will experience some form of intimate partner violence or domestic abuse. And I think it's important. I'd like to echo some of what Wulan said, that domestic violence and abuse existed long before this pandemic took hold. And the reason why we're hearing about it more is because, there's more proximity between people who are, at stay-at-home orders or quarantined, and that's important to bring awareness to that. However, how we frame domestic violence here in the U.S. is that it's very much about power and control, and we never place the focus so much on what the victim is or is not doing in their situation. We would regard that as victim blaming. For example, the question of why doesn't she leave, or why doesn't he leave? We more so reframe the question of why is the abuser doing what they're doing, and how is the victim survivor staying safe actually sometimes by staying. And that actually may be a safety measure. And so for us, in terms of, I work at a domestic violence resource center, it's about identifying pathways of safety for that victim survivor, and a helpline or hotline through either a national, state, or local domestic violence center, resource center, is one pathway. And services, safety can look different for different people. It could be, having someone to talk with and share your story with. It could be finding shelter. It could be legal support and assistance. It could be joining a support group. It could be receiving assistance, filling out forms to get insurance here in the U.S., or to get assistance with being able to buy food. There's a range of services that domestic resource centers like myself, or like the one that I work for, offer victim survivors. And so pathways to safety can look very different for different survivors, depending on their situation. I will also say that domestic violence impacts the LGBTQ community as well, and can present in similar and different ways. One other thing that we offer help with our clients is protection from abuse orders. So that's through the civil and legal courts. So there are different things, but what it all comes back to is that this relationship of power and control existed before the coronavirus set in. And I actually brought a graphic along to again to kind of build on some of what Wulan was speaking about, that there are different forms of abuse. It's not just physical, it can be sexual, emotional, verbal, economic, using children, weaponizing children. Yeah. So if I don't know if there's a moment to bring up that graphic, or if that's something we'd
I
like
think
to
Adam team will share screen the graphics.
Okay.
In a minute.
Yep.
Okay. Here you go. The power and control wheel.
Yeah, so this is a tool that advocates use in our work, that we share with our clients and victim survivors. It can be an important tool to actually identify the kinds of abuse that person is experiencing, which may not be understood as abuse. And I think it's also important to define what domestic abuse is. There are a couple of key features: that it's a pattern of controlling behavior, that it is not an isolated incident. It's something that happens in different forms over time. And those forms can include some of what we see on this wheel here. It exists in the context of a current or former relationship. So intimate partner relationship, marriage. It can also occur with elderly people as well, and children. Both elders and children are also victims of domestic violence. A key piece here is when the abusive person is using intimidating, threatening, harmful, or harassing behavior, some of what we see on this wheel, which is designed to instill fear in their victims. So that's really important. We have the pattern and we have the fear that is instilled. And sometimes fear can be created without any physical violence. So we see that coercion and threats, intimidation, emotional abuse, isolation, economic abuse, male privilege, using children, all of these are tactics of an abuser that may occur without any physical violence happening. But as we see in the wheel, all of these different tactics are surrounded by the threat of physical and sexual violence. And an abuser will basically use whatever tactics they can or need to maintain control. And that's what it's about. So another feature of domestic abuse, how we define it, is that it's purposeful and chosen. It is not out of control. We hear a lot of, oh, he just lost control, or she was drunk, or they were under the influence, or they've had a bad childhood. I think that we all know people that grew up in a difficult home situation, or people that have struggles with alcohol or other substances, or have mental health struggles, that do not choose to abuse the people that they supposedly care about. So again, domestic violence is purposeful and chosen. And finally, what's really important, what's undergirding all of this when we look for explanations about domestic violence, is we really attach it to a belief system or a mindset of that abuser, that the abuser believes, whether that's conscious or unconscious, that they have a right to limit the civil liberties and rights of another person. And that comes with a real sense of entitlement and the superior-inferior kind of mindset, that I'm superior and this other person is inferior. And that we see really attached to in the spoke in the wheel of male privilege. So that's kind of an overview, a definition of domestic violence that we work with in the U.S., and also this important tool that identifies different abuser tactics that we use with our clients. And actually, there's a very interesting project that Allison may tell us about at some point as well.
Yes. Thank you, Nicole. And I'll just move to Allison. Like what Nicole mentioned before, that you also have some kind of campaign that you're working on with some of your friends. Maybe if you, it would be nice if you could please share to us the campaign that you've been working on, and then how do you actually, what kind of activity that you actually do to raise the awareness of, according to this, addressing to this issue.
So what I'm working on right now with Finding Our Voices is they call it the banner campaign. So they're putting, I think they're 4-foot banners in storefront windows down main streets in our town, all across the state of Maine. And it's really just to bring light of like how common domestic violence really is, and to just kind of get the victims out of the shadows and back into the light, and to not feel ashamed or that you're any less than now just because that happened to you. Yeah, that's.
So how is it so far? I mean, how's the response of people in there to the campaign that you're working on with?
I think the response has been great. A lot of businesses across the entire state have, accepted them. I've had a few people reach out to me that have seen the banners and knew that I was just working with Patricia, so they asked me more about it. And I just, people that probably would never even think twice about domestic violence even being an issue in Little Maine. I just think it opens people's eyes up to just see how common it really is.
Well, actually, the goal or the purpose of the campaign is to let people know that if something happened to them, they always have support, and also they can always have friends around. They can always get an assistance from anyone, and there is an organization who can actually help them to it, right?
Yeah, absolutely. On the banner, there is the hotlines number, as well as the website, which you could go to and see other options that you can have. But yeah, it's the biggest part of the poster, I believe, is the phone number and the website, as you can see there. Yeah.
Breaking the silence of intimate partner abuse. That's a type.
Yeah, and everybody's is different. Like, you all have like a little quote on some. Mine is, "It was all a lie." So I think it's all different types, and yeah, my power and control wheel.
Well, talking about that, Allison, in your opinion, what is the most important support and also assistance that we need? I mean, that the victim needs when facing this kind of condition?
I think it's number one is support. For me, it was definitely, having an advocate. Mine was Nicole, who's here today. Just having that person that's going to continue to reach out to you. Even if you don't answer your phone, they're going to keep trying. Like, it's just nice you need that support to just know that you're not alone, and there is a light at the other side. You just have to get through it, and make sure you reach out to all of your resources, because there are people there when you do choose to make that first step. And that's the hardest step to make, is to accept the help. And yeah, I mean, I've come a long way since first reaching out for help. It's pretty amazing.
So everybody needs someone to at least talk to, and also to speak more about it, and then hope that can get more insight about what is actually going on in our life, right? Okay, talking about that, Nicole, as you are working at the New Hope for Women, I believe that there are lots of women, and also men, who's coming to you, or especially for this case, is a women coming to you and also seek for help. They need you to advocate them, but most of them are also women with children. In this case, how do you give support to someone who's getting abused by their partners, but at the same time, they also need to take care of their family member at the same home? How do you,
Yes, I would say that
what-
not necessarily most of the clients that we work with, but many do have children for sure. And in the United States, we certain people are required by law to actually report suspected child abuse to Child Protective Services, and that's part of our statewide Department of Human and Health Services. So that's part of the government. It's a government agency, and so that's one way that child safety, is attempted in the U.S. But it's similar with similar services that we offer the same services to our clients who are victim survivors that have children, but we might do some additional safety planning with children. For example, can children stay with other family members temporarily while the victim survivor is looking at their options to leave? Children can be educated about how to call the police, how to call 911, or if there's a code word, that a parent can give a child or children about when it's unsafe and when they may need to go and hide or leave the house, go to a neighbor's. Again, this is all part of what we call safety planning and creating pathways to safety. One thing that we know, which Wulan also intimated in when she was speaking, is that when a woman is getting ready to leave is actually the most dangerous time. And this increases her risk of being killed, actually. When we reflect back on that power and control, as the abuser loses control, some abusers will actually try to reassert that control and really escalate. And that can take the form of murder. And in Maine, we know that 40 to 50% of the homicides that occur in Maine, 40 to 50% are domestic violence related, are because of a domestic violence homicide. So yeah, in terms of, parenting when domestic violence is present, there are resources that we provide our clients. There are books, very good books, about, how to heal that relationship with the child, whether you are still in the abusive relationship or whether you are out. And I will say that the wheel that we showed earlier, there are many different versions of that wheel. But one of those is actually called the post-separation wheel. And so we like to think that when a victim leaves the abusive relationship, that the abuse is over. But in fact, that abuse can continue, through weaponizing children, through using legal systems. When I mentioned Child Protective Services, sometimes an abuser will falsely report abuse of another parent, the victim. There are all kinds of tactics that can continue, and children are definitely, a big part of that. So it's important to keep children safe as well. And I just want to acknowledge, the bravery and courage of victim survivors in not only, keeping themselves safe, but also keeping their children safe, and what incredible courage it takes to survive, that they're surviving every day. And also to reach out for help, as Allison mentioned, and as she courageously did.
Reaching out for help, that's one of the main things that a victim should do. Well, talking about that, but Wulan, I'd like to talk to you about it more. A few weeks ago, maybe I remember that I saw some of the video that shows us that during the pandemics, when we're at home, when we have the abusers around us, that we can do some signs. We can show some signs to seek for help. Like we can use the technology and we can just video call our friends, also advocator, and then we can tell them what has actually happened in our home. Do you mind to elaborate more and also talk about it more, Mbak Wulan?
Okay. I think we also being trying to be a support system, I think we also need to explore many ways that those people who are currently living under domestic violence and abusive relationship can have access to help. A lot of people might not be able to access internet or phone or anything. A lot of people might not be able to verbalize their cry for help, for instance, and they could only give signals, symbols, and everything. So I think it's also essential if we could help introduce ways other than just verbal ways to for those survivors to be able to ask for help. If I'm not mistaken, the sign language for domestic violence cry for help, asking for help, was initially introduced in the US. Please do correct me if I'm wrong. But it's because the abuser sometimes is just around you, then, you know, you just can't say, help me, because there's a chance that he or she might be hearing you and then, you know, come forward and say, who are you talking to? Who are you asking for help to? And that just sort of worsen the situations. So at the moment, there are people who are also exploring those possibilities. But again, sometimes not everybody will be exposed to that nonverbal language. But us as person who we never know, who's around us, who can be experiencing that. And like Nicole said earlier, there are so many subtle ways to intimidate, to create violence situations. Physical and sexual is what can be observed, but as you can see from the cycle before, from the wheel before, that there are so many other ways that could be used to create dependency, constant fear, and also that makes them uneasy to leave. So you can always, whenever you talk to someone, you can always, extend simple kindness, like, you can always talk to me when you need something. I'll be here to listen. Even things that you're probably not comfortable talking to anyone, but if you, trust me enough, if you feel comfortable with me, even if it's just, you want me to walk with you to groceries, or even if you can't, you want me to help you with groceries, by all means, let me know. Sometimes when Alison might be able to elaborate this as well from her experience, sometimes when we are in that situations, one of the most violated elements from us is our trust, because the person who is the closest to us, the person who's supposed to love us and protect us, hurt us, and that violates our trust. And if we are having issues of trusting the person that we're supposed to feel safe with, of course, it's going to be more difficult to trust others. But I do believe that people can sense sincerity and genuinity. People can, exercise their instincts when they feel that you're a safe person or you're not a safe person. So always exercise that empathy and kindness, because that might be the language that is needed.
Okay.
Non-verbal language that is needed, that kind of simple offers, that kind of small gestures might be a way to open up a communication, might give them an alternative to voice out that they need help.
And that environment can also give a sense that there is a safe place for them to talk about it, to discuss about it, and also to actually get out from the abusive
I
relationship.
think when we talk about safety net, it would be more on person, because we could have an establishment or a building says shelter, but it's just a building. The real safety net, the real shelter, is the person who is staying there with you, who's willing to listen to you, and who's willing to reach out and assist you, and who will not stand aside or stay quiet when they see you in trouble, and will check in on you when they don't hear from you. Just like what Allison did to what Nicole did to Allison. That's a very good example.
Okay, thank you, Ulan, for the talks. And I'll just go to the question and answer session because we already gathered some question from the audience. Okay, let me check it first. Okay, I'll just go to this question first. There's a question from the Instagram. He asked about how to deal with mental stress, as you know that we as a student graduating this year. And he or she, okay, I think, well, this student, I guess, need to get, some kind of directed hotline maybe from the Ulan point of view. Do you have any suggestion of the hotline that she or he can contact while getting any kind of mental stress?
Okay, so he or she is having mental stress because of the quarantine and soon to be graduating. Is that?
Yes, and also got some abuse from the parents. So
I see.
Yeah.
I see. Please stay tuned until the end of the sessions, because I think AdAmerica has prepared a running text for hotline numbers that he can reach out to that offers counseling sessions as well. Because, I think it's good that he or she is reaching out and realizing that what's happening to him or her is not supposed to happen, and if he can define himself or herself in that situations and wanting to seek help, I think that's also a very good first step, because usually pathway to recovery or getting out of this situation, the hardest part is always admitting that you are in that problem. But that's also understandable, because if you have been accustomed to that situation for so long, Nicole talked about power and control. That leaves the person who is experiencing the abuse or the violence part having issues believing that he or she could still reclaim his or her power and reestablish his or her independency again. So acknowledging this and asking help is really a good start.
Okay, and later on you will share the hotline number, right?
Yes.
Okay. There's also another question in here. Let me just read the question. Hi, my father is a sensitive person, and many times he cannot control his temper. Then he blames things to my mother. Sometimes I want to tell him that he doesn't need to blame everything to my mother. But it's hard for me to do that, since I feel like it will hurt him and make him feel disrespected. So I don't know what to do. What should I do? Is there any strategies that I can do while talking to my dad about that? Maybe Nicole, you want to respond to that question?
Sure. Again, I just really want to acknowledge again the courage for this person to share a little bit about their situation. And my input would be, again, to reach out to the equivalent of a domestic violence resource center here in Indonesia. It's important, I think, to mention that domestic violence resource centers are not just for the primary victim survivors. They're also for, what we would call secondary victims, or, victimization in a situation. And it sounds like this young person is speaking about potential abuse that is happening to their mother and wanting to intervene. And that is a very difficult situation. And I think when we also bring cultural context into the discussion as well, and deeply held beliefs that we have about, who has authority in relationships, parents and versus children, and male figures versus female figures, there's a lot of different elements and complexities there. And I think that the most important thing is for this young person to get the support for themselves, because that sounds like a very difficult situation that they're in. They care about both their mother and their father. Mm-hmm. They don't want to be disrespectful. And so it sounds like, but they don't want to keep seeing this happen to their mother. And as a survivor myself from childhood abuse, I can relate to this person's situation. And, I think if there is a safe family member to reach out to, that is also another option. Mm-hmm. But sometimes family members who are well-meaning, do not say the right things, do not know how to help. They feel overwhelmed themselves. And so I strongly suggest that this young person, if they're in college, is there a support resource at the university or college that they could reach out to? In some universities and colleges in the United States, there are centers within the institution where you can reach out about what's happening and receive support. But in terms of the specialized area, again, the Domestic Violence Resource Center, the equivalent of that in Indonesia would be my recommendation, to get that person support and information that they may be able to share with their mother.
It's also related to the question from someone who asked about whether there is a community or organization that people can turn to for help, and where can someone go when they feel uncomfortable about something, and then they want to talk about it to someone. Well, the answer would be, Wulan already mentioned before that Wulan will share it later on in Indonesia, and Nicole will also share the number later, right? Okay. So the next question that I got in here is, this is such an interesting question for me. Okay, what if the abuser doesn't realize that what they're doing is wrong? Maybe it's also related with Nicole and Wulan, and also Allison mentioned before that sometimes people just feel like they can change. It's just out of control. And when they're in control, they will just be back to normal and not doing the abusive act. But the question is, how, as someone who wants to help the victim and also help the abuser to recover from that situation, so the abuser and also the victim can both make it work again? Is there any possibility to work like that?
I can speak to that. I think that the most important person to focus on is the victim survivor, that connecting them with the resources. In the United States, in terms of abusers or batterers or perpetrators of domestic violence, as we identify them, I will say that the prospect for change is not good. These are very deeply held beliefs and a mindset. And in the United States, we have programs called Certified Batterers Intervention Programs. And sometimes the abuser is forced by the court system, or even maybe Child Protective Services in some cases, to engage in this program, which is a near year-long program. And that is the best hope at change. But what it really comes down to is the abuser has to recognize that they are using power and control in their intimate partner relationship or with children. And they have to be the ones that take accountability and responsibility for their choices. They have to be the ones that want to make the change. And that may come from pressure from the outside. Like I said, the court systems in the United States, why it's so important to have good anti-violence legislation, like you're talking about in Indonesia, anti-domestic violence legislation. That's a piece of it, what courts can do. But honestly, trying to convince an abuser to not abuse is probably not a good use of time.
Okay.
Better use of time is getting resources, information about resources to the victim survivor.
Okay. Thank you, Nicole. Wulan, do you want to add something to that?
I agree with Nicole. I think with limited resources and energy that we have, empowering the survivors would be a much more significant investment of our time and energy, because unless the perpetrator shows willingness to change, then we don't. I mean, in Indonesia, of course, there has been notions that people who are experiencing domestic violence should stay together. Don't get divorced, because it's going to ruin your children's future. It would scar them for life, etc. But what we also need to look at is that children will be scarred anyway, seeing forms of violence on a daily basis at their homes. It's not really a good role model or a good values that we want the children to grow up with, resolving problems with disrespectful behavior, intimidating behavior, and even violence. So agree, because a lot of policies are also tend to be punitive, if there is such, but not necessarily taking care of the well-being and the needs of the survivors, even long after, because those kinds of experience, domestic violence, abusive relationship, it lasts for lives. So I would recommend more to focus on assisting and empowering survivors.
Okay, thank you, Wulan and Nicole. And I have a question here for Allison from the social media. Someone asked that, what can people actually do to help and support the victim of the abuser?
I would say providing support, having that empathy, not judging, not asking, why didn't you leave sooner? Why didn't you reach out? All of those things are irrelevant once you actually, I feel like, make that choice to seek for help and just be that support, and just make sure you're always there and just check in. If you don't hear from them, just check in, because maybe I know I've done it. I've just ignored my phone for weeks, but if you continue to call or text, you're going to get an answer back. And then it's nice to just know that somebody's still reaching out and that cares about you and your family and how you're doing now. I think that's the key, is the support continued.
So just checking in, and also just keep monitoring the victim, because that's what the victim needs, right?
Yeah, because you have good and bad days. Absolutely. Yeah, not every day is easy. Like, I've had a good few months, and then you have a bad couple weeks, and just to know you still have that support, you need it for a while. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Allison.
Thank you.
Okay, I think it's the time for us to share the number that the viewers can reach whenever they feel like they need help and need assistance, because some questions in here that I found also ask about that. Okay. Do you want to talk more about that, Wulan or Nicole, while showing the number?
Right. I hope this is also in the running text on the YouTube Live, but of course, I'd be more than happy to mention. Number one is the hotline for LBH Apik. I'm gonna mention the number slowly, just so that people will have enough time to write down the number. Again, hotline LBH Apik 0813 888 22 669.
Okay, you can.
That's for WhatsApp only.
Okay.
So for LBH Apik, you can of course also getting legal assistance, and then also Yayasan Pulih, a trauma center, trauma recovery center. Yayasan Pulih is at 0811 843 6633.
Okay.
Okay, I think those two are most important hotlines that people can tap into
whenever they think that they need help. Okay, thank you, Juan. And how about you, Nicole? Do you want to share the hotline number in the US so that people can seek for help? Nicole?
Yes, I'm right here. Sorry, I was just pulling it up.
Okay.
So for those with internet access, I do recommend going to the website. It's just called thehotline.org. And that is the National Domestic Violence Hotline. The actual number to call is 1-800-799-7233. That is 1-800-799-7233. Another important thing I wanted to mention when we talked about technology and COVID, a lot of domestic violence resource centers are also opening up web chat so that the victim survivor does not need to use the phone per se. They could use their phone or computer to connect with an advocate. And I believe that can also happen through the National Domestic Violence Hotline as well, that there are chat services. So I encourage those that are based in the US that are watching this or have friends or family that are in the US that may be a victim to utilize those resources, to go to the website, the hotline, or to go to that number that I mentioned. And I believe those will also be shared with this audience after this presentation.
Okay, thank you, Nicole. And I think we've come to the end of the discussion. But before we end this discussion, I would like to ask the closing statement first from all of the speakers that we have today. Maybe Allison, do you want to start? Okay, I think Allison is still working on the audio. So I think I will just go to Ulan for it. So Ulan, to sum up the discussion that we have here, maybe do you want to give some closing remarks, closing statement about what we've been discussing?
I think one important note that I would like everyone to take home with is that we need to start talking about it, because that's the only way we break the silence. Whatever the data that we currently have, it's always just the tip of the iceberg. That's what statistics is about. It's always the tip of the iceberg. So we're looking at reported numbers, but as statistics also shown, there are larger numbers of people who experience violence who do not report, perhaps because they've been intimidated by their support system, by the legal system, etc. But there are ways to get better and to recover and to empower and to reclaim the power from that situations. And for those of you who are experiencing domestic violence and currently watching this, there are people who are more than willing to help and listen. And for those of us who are not experiencing violent situations, please extend the kindness and empathy. You'll never know who are in need for your hand reaching out for them, who are in need for your voice to be lent to them. That's it.
Okay. Well, thank you, Ulan.
Thank you.
I think Allison is good to go.
I think so.
Okay, yeah.
Sorry.
It's okay.
I guess all I can share is just reach out to whatever your resources are, wherever you are, whether it be a friend or a hotline or a chat, and just know you're not alone in this, and you don't have to be. Just reach out, and people will be there. I thought I would be alone for sure. And just remember, you're not. Please reach out for help.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And just seek for help, and then also just realize that you're not alone.
You're not alone. Yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you, Allison, for the thoughts and also sharing with us. And how about you, Nicole? Do you have something to say?
Yes. Again, I want to thank AdAmerica for this and the U.S. Embassy for this opportunity. I want to echo, what Ulan and Allison said, that, survivors in this audience, and we know that there are not alone. And just to acknowledge the incredible courage it takes to survive every day, and also to reach out for support. And that, again, that this can feel very isolating, but there are resources when you're ready to do that. And, for those that are not experiencing domestic violence or are out of those relationships, there's important opportunities. It sounds like in Indonesia, to reach out to your representatives to advocate for change, on the in terms of the upcoming bill. When we talk about change, we can look at like the interpersonal and the community level, but also more systems-wide change. This is a very, complex issue that has to do with gender and culture and a lot of different areas. And so I think, one thing that's very important that I believe Heather mentioned, is also just reaching out and speaking up about improved laws and legislation to protect and empower victim survivors.
Okay, thank you so much, Nicole, Allison, and also Ulan. And we still have Bu Heather in here. Thank you for still here, and also all of the viewers. Well, if I can summarize the discussion that we had today, it's actually, it takes all of us to take action from the victim side. Don't hesitate to seek for help. Always looking for help, and also be brave to speak up, no matter how long it takes. But just know the time that you need to speak no, and also you need to take action to stop everything that has been happened to you. And also for the people around the victims, don't forget to always show your sympathy, because you don't know how much that sympathy and also that empathy would mean to someone's, and would also be beneficial to someone's life. So thank you so much for today. Thank you for all of the speakers, and also the speakers, the panelists, and all of the viewers for today. And I would like to remind the hotline number again. If you think that you need help and also you need assistance when you're in Indonesia, you can always reach to LBH APIK. The number is 0813-888-22669. Or you can go to their website and also find the email of them. And you can also go to, okay, I think that's all. Oh, in the US, you can always go to the website, the National Domestic Violence. Nicole already shared it to us on the chat box. You can see it there. Well, thank you so much for the talks today. We got lots of insight, and we hope that we can implement it, and we can always make a comfortable environment, and we can also feel safe whenever we are. Well, I'll give it back to James. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you so much to our speakers and moderators for the information, for the informative session, and bringing more awareness and discussions to this topic. It's really important in this day and age to have more awareness to it. Earlier in the event, we asked our audience, we asked everyone, true or false? The current lockdown has nothing to do with the increasing number of domestic violence cases. The answer is false, because social restrictions can trigger domestic violence due to changes in people's daily lives. Congratulations goes to Cheham Usop, watching us all the way from the Philippines and answering on Facebook, for answering correctly. Thank you to everyone who has participated. Don't forget to tune in next time and get a chance to get a shout out from us. Now, you may be wondering, how can I develop an awesome idea for a place like this? You don't need to worry. All you need to do is visit our website at www.atamerica.or.id, select Create a Program, and click Collaborate with us. All event proposals coming to us will be reviewed, and your event might be featured here soon. You can also subscribe to our newsletter for all our weekly updates. That wraps this episode, everyone. It's been fun, but we have to say goodbye for now. Don't forget to subscribe to our Twitter, our Facebook, and our Instagram at @ATAmerica, and also to subscribe to our YouTube channel. Thanks again. My name is James. See you next time on At America TV. Bye.